In fact, I feel very confident that if there was an actual attack on a NATO ally, that the United States would be there. We have thousands of troops that are literally already there.
If and when it came to Vladimir Putin striking against a NATO member's territory, well, there may well be no order from the president, if it's Donald Trump at that time, to join in the fight in strict interpretation of the NATO treaty. But it wouldn't just be about that, General, would it? You would have Washington, you would have Capitol Hill, you'd have Congress. They may well have something to say about that, and probably would have a lot.
Yeah, I would ask all of our allies to have a longer term view of this. The damage, serious damage, has been done, but the fact is, the United States, even in the Trump administration, they know how much we need allies. Absolutely need allies. The bases, the access, as well as the actual capabilities, because we can't do it all by ourselves. And so most members of Congress understand and the alliance and why it's so important. Most members of Congress understand how we need to be able to fly in and out of UK and Germany and Turkey, and our Navy has to operate in European bases. So I think that, in fact, I feel very confident that if there was an actual attack on a NATO ally, that the United States would be there. We have thousands of troops that are literally already there. The problem is that the Russians may make a terrible miscalculation if they think that there's a huge crack in the cohesion of the alliance. Then they do something to precipitate a war.
General, do bear with me for a moment. I just want to break off for a second and cross live to Brussels, because Mette Frederiksen, the Danish leader, is speaking now live. Let's go there. That's Mette Frederiksen, the Danish leader, speaking live on her way into the EU summit in Brussels. You heard she was asked, did President Trump's bullying win in the end? She was saying, look, we have to respect our sovereignty when it comes to any solution on Greenland. Now, General, Ben Hodges, still with us live on the line. Ben, thank you for bearing with us on that.
Of course.
I mean, listening to that, were you one of those who felt perhaps America's allies and friends in Europe maybe ought to have taken a tougher line in facing this Greenland crisis than they did at the time?
Yeah, of course. I will say the Danish Prime Minister, I mean, she's equal to an armored division herself. I mean, she has been so impressive from the very beginning. But, and I have a hard time formulating this, but the United States needs allies. And that means we need allies that are strong enough not only to stand up to Putin, but also strong enough and willing to stand up to this kind of bullying. Nothing good for NATO or any European country comes out of European leaders who grovel in front of the American president. And if you add together the economies, the populations, the wealth, technology of all of the European allies plus Canada, it's at least equal to what the United States has. So I don't understand why people collapse like a cheap folding chair when the president threatens, these unbelievable tariffs.
Yeah.
I think that, and what Ben Wallace said earlier on your show, that this was a fake deal, he's exactly right. This was a big fake deal. And so while I'm a proud American, I'm always pulling for my country.
Yes.
These kinds of things damage the security and the interests of the United States when our allies lose trust and confidence in us. So please stand up.
Okay, General, as a former experienced military U.S. commander and as a proud American, I just want to briefly get your reaction to this. This was President Trump interviewed on Fox News just a very short while ago on NATO. He said this.
I've always said, will they be there if we ever needed them? And that's really the ultimate test. And I'm not sure of that. I know that we would have been there, or we would be there. But will they be there? And let's hope that that never happens. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. They'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little back.
They stayed a little back, was what the president said about America's NATO allies serving alongside U.S. forces in Afghanistan. I'm looking, General, and you will need no reminder of this, of the high number of dead among America's allies on the battlefield in Afghanistan. As you hear the president say that those allies stood back from battle, well, what are your thoughts?
Well, please, when I heard him say this earlier, this was about as angry as I've been in quite some time. It's sickening, and I hope that people listening to the program will not think that all Americans believe that they understand that this is a person who, a five-time draft dodger himself, to comment, and Secretary Hegseth is just as bad. They don't have a clue. Look, I was in Kandahar from 2009 to 2010. Thousands of British soldiers, Canadian soldiers, Danish soldiers, Romanians, and others. I was out on the runway many nights at what we called a ramp ceremony when the bodies of soldiers from all those nations have been killed were being flown home. There's no American soldier that believes what our president just said, and I'm sorry that he did that.
Okay, I appreciate your frank response to that question, General Ben Hodges, former U.S. Commanding General in Europe. Now, I want to welcome to Drive Anne Meckel, the executive editor at Politico and the co-host of Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast. She's in Davos and is live now. Hello to you, Anne.
Hi there. Hi, John.
Hi. So you've been immersed in this for days. What are your reflections on the state of, the transatlantic relationship, the Western alliance, and all the other questions that have been thrown so high in the air by what you've been watching in Davos?
Well, in some ways, as we head towards, this is really the last hurrah, the final night here at Davos. There's a bit of a demob happy mood. It's the last appearances of Donald Trump. But of course, right to the end, as he's been reflecting, he throws in provocations, he throws in talking points that are going to rile people as they do, General Hodges and many others, about the way that he framed the transatlantic alliance. I would say what happened last night when we left the speech thinking the tariff threat was still intact and that there was possibility of him continuing to say he was going to use force in Greenland, whether he did or didn't. But, obviously that amped up the temperature. It roused the Danes, completely understandably, and allies. He then stepped back from that, so causing massive indigestion across the entire media and political world of here at Davos. He then did step back from that. Now, it depends whether you think that's a modest win or you think, well, we're all a bit so brutalized that it's a bit like, well, I didn't beat you up so bad. What are you complaining about? It's a bit of an abusive relationship at the moment, but that's where it landed. And it did land perhaps a little bit in a better place than many expected.
Yeah, indeed. And we will see how we move from here. Just a word on the Board of Peace, Anne, which just in itself is a pretty remarkable, you can argue, history-making development. What it adds up to in the end is a whole other question. But we've seen established today something which clearly in the mind of the president and is widely seen as an alternative to the United Nations. What do you make of it? What do you think it adds up to?
I think it is the way that he sees it. It's become incredibly convoluted. Now there seem to be really sort of two boards of peace. They seem to be, with different kind of remits. Then you have that whole idea of the billion sort of entry fee if you want to sort of long stay there. So it's a bit like one of those subscription schemes that you're sort of trapped in, and then you suddenly find that someone said he approached it as if it were a fee for a luxury golf resort. Yes. But yeah, it is complicated. He does think of it in that way. The only thing is, there are lots of things that you can criticize Donald Trump for, and the way that he's setting up the Board of Peace and the vanity project aspect, I'm certainly extremely critical of. But there's another good point Mark Carney made in his speech, the Canadian Premier, former Bank of England governor. What the Board of Peace does is bringing other countries in Asia, middle income, rising countries, into some form of the international compact over Gaza. So what is Europe offering these countries? What is our form of a way of saying, can we all kind of sort this world out in a better way? We have left a gap there. And it is true that there are different ways to go about it. Donald Trump goes about it in a very mercantilist way. The Russians and the Chinese go about it in their way, offering sort of bribes and pressures. I do think it has highlighted something of a gap. So I'm not saying that this is the right answer. I think it'll be very contentious, and I don't know if it'll work. Yeah. But I do think it's highlighted that.
That is an interesting point, Anne. But it's also true that the founding documents, or the final drafts of the founding documents for the Board of Peace, don't mention Gaza. They do mention the president serving as chairman for life at his pleasure and his successor. to be chosen
Yeah, I mean, it's a very
by
odd thing.
his own pleasure.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. Is an enormous understatement. And then we have, don't we, the spectacle of the president on the tarmac, beside his jet. This was a couple of nights ago. He was made aware that the French leader Macron was not joining the border peace, and he spoke immediately about punishing him with tariffs on champagne and wine. And it doesn't bode well.
Well, none of this bodes well. But if if we're going to leave Davos and into these conversations saying the future is not like the past, and nostalgia is not a strategy, as Carney said, which I thought was actually the standout quote of this. And I'm certainly not saying to John, you're a seasoned, tough old journalist, right? Even tougher than me, maybe. But come on, this is the world we're in. Donald Trump is not doing things in any sort of unorthodox way.
Well, can this be discussed in that way, Anne? Can this really be discussed in that way as the new normal? Is that really the line you want to take? That this is the new normal. We need to get used to it.
Yeah. I mean, what else do you want to do then? I mean, there isn't a going back to something that can't be gone back to. It's not to say that countries, whether it's the UK or we've seen Europe probably did get a win on Trump stepping back on tariffs. Well, two reasons. One is that the Europeans made clear that they were beginning to go retaliatory. And two, the markets didn't like it. And Trump, he does listen to some of his advisors when the markets take an adverse view. So I'm not saying that this is in any sense welcome. I don't know whether the border peace will be net positive or net negative. It's certainly not the answer to the Gaza problem, but it does, of course, keep Donald Trump engaged in trying to find a solution and in keeping Israel involved in the talks. So you could look at it that way, that it stops his attention wandering, at least prospectively it does. I mean, it's Donald Trump, so who knows? I just think there is you're framing it with sort of, oh, he's gone and done it again.
Yes.
And yes, he does it. He does it again and again. But I think where we're being tested here is, what are our responses and what's our agility, given that this is the President of the United States?
And I do accept that is a relevant question. How do you deal with it if it is the new normal, or however you choose to term it? But it's always good to talk to you, and thank you, Anne McAvoy there.